and welcome to Weekly News Highlights. Let's begin with keywords that made headlines this week. The long-awaited day finally arrived for many students across South Korea. After months, even years of preparation, they sat the National College Entrance Exam, the Suneung, a grueling 9-hour test that could shape their academic future. As the global economy shows modest growth, South Korea's path to recovery remains uncertain, with forecasts divided over the potential impact of U.S. tariffs. President Lee Jae-myung says racial discrimination and hate speech must be eradicated, calling them a threat to democracy. At a cabinet meeting on Tuesday, he urged swift legal reforms to address hate speech and proposed scrapping the clause that criminalized factual defamation. At a cabinet meeting on Tuesday, President Lee Jae-myung called for stern punishment for racial discrimination and hate speech, which he says have become rampant in South Korea. The cabinet also confirmed the country's new emissions target for 2035. Our top office correspondent Yoon Jung-min has the details.
Racial discrimination and hate speech are a threat to democracy and need to be rooted out. That was President Lee Jae-myung as he opened the weekly cabinet meeting on Tuesday, saying such comments, hatred, and disinformation are rampant in the Korean society and increase social unrest.
이는 표현의 자유의 한계를 넘어서는 명백한 범죄 행위입니다. 혐오 표현에 대한 처벌 장치를 속히 마련하고
As the president was briefed by his justice minister on revising the Criminal Act, he urged that the criminal defamation clause that punishes factual statements be separated from the criminal law, saying any related case should be dealt with under the civil code.
혐오 표현 처벌을 위한 형법 개정을 해야 될 필요가 있어 보이는데 만약에 하게 되면 그 사실적시 명예훼손 제도 이번 기회에 동시에 폐지하시는 걸 검토하십시오.
Recently, the chief of the Korean Red Cross resigned over past racist comments about foreign ambassadors, which were recently revealed by a report. The cabinet also confirmed on Tuesday a new goal to reduce South Korea's greenhouse gas emissions by 53 to 61% from the 2018 levels by 2035, as Lee called the change inevitable to achieve sustainable growth. At the same time, he also noted controversy, stressing the importance of striking a balance.
전통적인 예를 들면 석탄 발전소 또는 화석 연료 사용하는 산업들 이게 이제 부담이 커지는 거고. 그렇습니다. 대신에 이제 재생 에너지 산업이나 이런 부분은 기회가 또 생기는 거고.
Given past experiences, the affected industries worry that they wouldn't get the government support that they need, despite an earlier government promise.
The new emission target is set to be announced later this month at the COP30 in Brazil. The same day, the cabinet suggested that a task force be established to investigate any involvement of certain public officials in the martial law attempt by former President Yoon Suk-yeol last December. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
South Korea continues to back the UN resolution condemning North Korea's human rights violations, despite speculation that the government could pull back from such efforts to ease tensions on the peninsula. Our Kim Bo-kyung explains.
South Korea is backing the UN General Assembly's resolution condemning North Korea's human rights violations as one of the 41 UN member states. This, according to the resolution document released on Wednesday. South Korea continued to co-sponsor the resolution from 2008 to 2018, but under the Moon Jae-in administration between 2019 and 2022, it withdrew, citing concerns about the impact on inter-Korean relations. Seoul rejoined in 2023 under the previous Yoon Suk-yeol administration. There has been speculation that the Lee Jae-myung government pushing for dialogue with Pyongyang would withdraw. But with Seoul's renewed backing of the resolution, this shows the Lee government is approaching the North Korea human rights issues as a matter of universal values and principles. In fact, one official from the foreign ministry reportedly said the Lee government believes it to be important to bring about real improvements in the human rights of North Korean residents and thus joined the latest resolution as a co-sponsoring country in cooperation with the international community. The U.S., meanwhile, is not among the sponsoring countries as it withdrew from the UN Human Rights Council in February under President Trump. The latest resolution expressed deep concern about the grave human rights violations in the regime, the pervasive culture of impunity, and the lack of accountability for human rights violations and abuses. It also condemned the reclusive state for using resources on military spending and on illegal nuclear weapons and ballistic missile program rather than securing welfare. The resolution will be introduced at the UN's Third Committee before being brought to the General Assembly plenary next month for final adoption. North Korea has strongly opposed the UN's resolutions on its human rights situation, with Pyongyang's foreign ministry spokesperson last year calling it a grave political provocation that violates the regime's sovereignty. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Lawmakers in South Korea cleared a busy agenda on Thursday, passing numerous bills while preparing for high-profile votes and important legislation later this month. Our political correspondent Moon Ye-ryun has the details.
Lawmakers in South Korea wrapped up a packed parliamentary session on Thursday, moving swiftly through a slate of non-controversial bills while also reporting a high-profile arrest motion. More than 50 livelihood-related bills were passed in roughly 2 hours, following an agreement reached between the ruling Democratic Party and the main opposition People Power Party before the session. Among the bills were education-related measures, including stronger penalties for university admissions officers who fail to step aside when conflicts of interest arise, amendments to the Last Mile Logistics Industry Development Act, which strengthens protection for delivery workers, and changes to the Motor Vehicle Management Act aimed at preventing electric vehicle fires. The motion to arrest People Power Party lawmaker Chu Kyung-ho was also reported during today's session. He has been accused of obstructing last December's parliamentary vote to lift the emergency martial law order, and in response, Chu is calling the investigation politically motivated. The next plenary session is scheduled for the 27th, where lawmakers will vote on the arrest motion for former PPP floor leader Chu Kyung-ho and finalize negotiations on fast-track bills still pending agreement. These fast-track bills include a new act aimed at strengthening the competitiveness of South Korea's semiconductor industry, which establishes a related committee under the president, as well as amendments to an act guaranteeing the right of franchises to collective bargaining. Fast-track designation allows urgent bills to skip normal committee reviews and go straight to a plenary session for a vote. Thursday's plenary session also included appointments to the Nuclear Safety and Security Commission, recommended by the People Power Party and the Speaker of the National Assembly. Other appointments requiring parliamentary approval, such as those to the Anti-Corruption and Civil Rights Commission, National Education Commission, and Human Rights Commission, will be addressed at the session later this month. Moon Ye-ryun, Arirang News.
South Korea's job market extended this year's positive momentum, adding over 190,000 jobs last month, but trends varied across industries and age groups.
South Korea saw a continued upward trend in employment last month, but employment losses persisted in manufacturing and construction, as well as among the younger population. According to the Ministry of Data and Statistics on Wednesday, the number of employed people stood at over 29 million in October, adding more than 190,000 jobs.
While the upward trend in employment continued, the pace of increase narrowed as job losses persisted in sectors such as agriculture, forestry and fishing, construction, and manufacturing. Meanwhile, the number of unemployed people decreased, and the economically inactive population increased.
Employment data in the manufacturing and construction sectors remained sluggish. The manufacturing sector had more than 50,000 jobs in October from a year earlier, extending its downturn to a 16th consecutive month. The construction industry also continued to struggle, losing more than 120,000 jobs to continue its decline for the 18th straight month. On the other hand, the number of employed individuals increased in sectors such as wholesale and retail, arts, sports and leisure, accommodation, and restaurants. Officials attributed this increase to government initiatives, including the Livelihood Recovery Consumption Coupons. By age, older adults primarily led the overall job growth, and while employment also rose for those in their 30s, job numbers declined for all other age groups. Notably, young people aged 15 to 29 experienced the steepest drop, with their employment rate recording its 18th consecutive monthly decline. In contrast, the rising number of economically inactive individuals taking time off to rest was especially pronounced among those in their 30s, reaching its highest level since data collection began. A government official explained that despite their generally strong employment and economic activity rates, fewer people in their 30s were inactive due to childcare or housework, with more now simply choosing to rest. 문지영, Arirang News.
South Korea's economic recovery remains uncertain, with forecasts divided over the potential impact of U.S. tariffs. For more on this, we have our economics correspondent Moon Ji-young in the studio. Welcome, Ji-young.
Thanks for having me.
Right, to start us off, let's start with the global economy. So what are the key growth projections and what risks could shape next year?
Yes, Sujin. So the 2026 global economic picture, as framed by the Korea Institute for International Economic Policy, is one of a buffered slowdown amid an asymmetric world. This implies a global economy with no clear common direction, exhibiting differing trends across regions, even as nations partially mitigate economic shocks. The state-run institute projects the global economy to grow by 3% in 2026, matching this year's pace. This represents a 0.1 percentage point upward revision from the institute's previous forecast made in May. A major downside risk is the rapid shifts in the new tariff and trade order. The impact of U.S. tariffs slow global trade volume growth, weakening the multilateral trading system.
As countries with a high dependency on trade will find it difficult to avoid pressure from reduced exports due to worsening external conditions. This uncertainty in the trade sector is one of the most significant downside risks.
Additional risks include weakened physical capacity and disruptions from imbalanced AI investment. Regionally, growth rates vary. As tariffs dampen consumer sentiment, the U.S. economy is forecast to grow by 1.6%. The Eurozone is projected to grow by 1.1% and Japan by 0.6%. Among emerging markets, China's growth is expected to moderate to 4.2%, slowed by the 2025 base effect and ongoing trade conflicts. Amidst moderate forecasts and risks, Kiev emphasizes critical international cooperation for navigating the asymmetric era despite limited policy options.
So moving on to the domestic front, how is South Korea's economy expected to fare next year, particularly with changing growth dynamics?
While the South Korean economy is expected to expand modestly at 1.8% next year, driven by domestic demand as U.S. tariffs take their toll on exports. This is according to the Korea Development Institute, which anticipates a significant shift in growth drivers from exports to domestic demand.
The growth of exports may gradually decelerate as the impact of tariff hikes progressively spreads. However, with consumption improving due to falling market interest rates and expansionary fiscal policies, accumulated construction orders are expected to partially translate into construction investment with a time lag. Consequently, despite the slowdown in export growth, the economy is anticipated to see a moderate improvement, primarily driven by domestic demand.
The state-run institute anticipates private consumption to rise by 1.6%, buoyed by falling market interest rates and expansionary fiscal policy. Construction investment is projected to rebound to 2.2% growth after a severe 9.1% contraction this year. Despite this anticipated shift, KDI flags high trade uncertainty and a persistently high exchange rate as primary risks, potentially fueling inflation.
So many other institutions, both at home and abroad, offer varying predictions for Korea's economy in 2026. So can you tell us more about this?
Well, that's a crucial point. Indeed, the Korean economy is expected to see a moderate recovery next year, but Trump's tariff mean differing growth forecasts between different institutions. While there is a general expectation for recovery, potentially doubling this year's average growth rate, predictions still vary substantially. Major domestic and international institutions project Korea's economic growth rate for 2026 to be between 1.6% and 2.2%. At the more optimistic end, the OECD and major global investment banks project 2.2% growth. Their positive outlook is largely attributed to recent better-than-expected export performance. In the mid-range, both the KDI and the IMF present their respective forecasts. On the more conservative side, the Asian Development Bank and the Bank of Korea forecast 1.6% growth. This creates a 0.6 percentage point gap between the highest and lowest projections. The primary reason for this significant difference lies in how each institution evaluates the potential impact of U.S. tariffs.
Right now, especially because of the Trump administration, a lot of things are very unsure. So a lot of people are making some assumptions about what will happen next year, which may or may not become true. And that's making a wide dispersion of growth estimates for next year, more than what we usually see.
However, a common consensus emerges amidst these varied forecasts and uncertainties. The recovery of domestic demand, suggesting internal economic engines will gradually pick up despite external volatility.
All right, so we'll be keeping a close eye on the economy. Thank you so much for sharing your insight with us today, Suneung.
Thank you for having me.
As South Korea moves towards building a nuclear-powered submarine, what will Seoul's greater sea power mean for regional and global security? Also, what will be the next steps and challenges ahead? Our Oh Seung takes a look.
South Korea's push to acquire nuclear-powered submarines marks a strategic step aligned with the rules-based international order amid growing regional tensions. President Lee Jae-myung last month asked President Donald Trump for cooperation in developing nuclear-propelled submarines with the use of US-enriched uranium fuel. Trump approved the request within 24 hours, a significant move, according to Dr. Yoo Ji-un, a former ROK Navy officer who has been deeply involved in the Navy's aircraft carrier and submarine programs.
It shows that Washington fully acknowledges South Korea's strategic importance as a maritime power and a trusted ally in the Indo-Pacific. U.S. support suggests more than political endorsement. It could mean closer cooperation in technology, industrial development, and operational planning.
Seoul has stressed that its pursuit of nuclear-powered submarines is not intended to fuel a broader arms race, underscoring that the project's purpose is defensive. North Korea earlier this year unveiled nuclear-powered submarines for the first time, raising alarm within and beyond the region.
North Korea already possesses submarine-launched ballistic missiles, and both China and Russia have been expanding their naval operations around the Korean peninsula. Conventional diesel-electric submarines are limited in endurance and range, but nuclear-powered submarines can remain submerged for months, giving South Korea a credible second strike capability and persistent surveillance presence.
Beyond Seoul's own security, Yoo says South Korea's sea power can fill a critical capability gap in regional security.
The United States likely supports this initiative because it strengthens collective deterrence and burden sharing within the alliance. A capable South Korean undersea fleet would enhance regional stability and complement U.S. and allied naval forces across the Indo-Pacific. Their ability to conduct long-endurance patrols would improve early warning, crisis monitoring, and intelligence collection on potential threats. In addition, these submarines would strengthen cooperation among like-minded allies, the US, Japan, Australia, and European partners, supporting a more integrated, rules-based maritime order.
But this will take time and strenuous effort, requiring congressional and regulatory approval.
Technologically, designing and safely operating a compact naval reactor requires time, extensive testing, and new industrial infrastructure. Regulatory challenges include establishing a framework for nuclear fuel supply and international safeguards under non-proliferation commitment.
So I imagine that the Department of Energy is going to take a much closer look at any export of nuclear technology and nuclear materials to South Korea. So the Department of Energy doesn't consider strategy or security or alliance management so much. It focuses on non-proliferation.
For now, Washington has expressed optimism about South Korea using its own shipyards.
Now, South Korea already has a very competent submarine industry, and so competent that it's a very competitive supplier to countries such as Australia and Canada and several European countries. So South Korea has the potential to construct its own submarines. Whether it's going to be allowed to do this in the context of a nuclear submarine is a whole nother question. So we've got the potential for the submarines to be built in the US, but this then puts in queue a whole range of extra hurdles for other states seeking submarines.
Experts expect around 8 to 10 years for a nuke-powered submarine to be operational, launched in the early to mid-2030s, in line with South Korea's Navy Vision 2045 and the nation's broader goal of achieving a blue water navy capable of global missions. Suneung, Arirang News.
South Korea's Navy launched a new Fleet Task Command earlier this year to facilitate flexible operations that extend beyond specific maritime regions. It conducted its first major drill to boost its combat capability. Our defense correspondent Kim Bo-kyung was at the site.
Warships going at a speed of 10 knots target an enemy warship located around 8 kilometers away. Water columns splash on the surface of the sea as the ships fire their guns at the same time. This is part of the Navy Task Fleet Command's 3-day drills to enhance operational capabilities.
Marking the very first fleet-level maritime maneuver training, the Navy's Task Fleet Command conducted a variety of drills moving across the East and the South Sea.
Navy's 1st, 2nd, and 3rd fleets operate in the East, West, and South Seas respectively, whereas the Task Fleet Command, established this February, aims to undertake operations across all maritime regions and even beyond the South Korea's maritime boundaries. The command had only conducted test group and squadron-level exercises until now. 7 warships, including the Aegis destroyer ROKS Cheongjo the Great, and 3 aircraft took part in the first fleet-level exercise, some 70 kilometers east of Pohang. Under simulated scenarios, ROKS Seohae Suneung detected multiple aircraft operations and missile attacks. After tracking the threats, the vessel ordered other warships to engage in combat and successfully took down the targets with SM-2 missiles.
Through its first fleet-level maneuver exercise, the Task Fleet Command was able to establish an operational posture capable of executing assigned missions anytime, anywhere. It will continue to maintain military readiness with overwhelming combat power, ensuring victory in any contingency.
The command will hold such exercises regularly to strengthen its capability to deal with whatever threats it might encounter. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News, Pohang.
Suneung Day 2025 has wrapped up in South Korea, the day when students across the nation sit for the country's marathon college entrance exam. And now these test takers are ready to enjoy a bit of freedom. An Sang-jin was at one of the test sites.
The long journey has come to an end. As students began to pour out after the 9-hour marathon national college entrance exam, also known as the Suneung, some had expressions of excitement on their faces, while some looked worried as friends and families greeted them.
It was a bit more difficult than what I practiced with, so I was a bit startled, but at least I'm done with it. I want to travel abroad or use the test paper discounts to have fun.
I want to allow myself to have a lot of rest. I think I did fine in the morning, but I'm not sure about the afternoon. I just want to go home and sleep, though I still have an interview to prepare for.
For many students here in South Korea, having a good score in the Suneung is something to strive for, as it could decide their next steps in life. This year, more than 550,000 students took the test at nearly 1,300 test centers across the nation. The number of test takers for this year was the highest in 7 years. though the number of those retaking the exam was slightly decreased, partly due to the reversal of plans to expand the medical school quota. To properly assess test takers' knowledge in line with the public education curriculum, the exam committee ensured a balanced distribution of questions with appropriate difficulty.
We excluded questions that would favor those trained in private education and focused on core and fundamental elements of the public school education.
A team of on-site teachers evaluated that this year's exam would have likely been perceived as slightly more challenging compared to last year's, as questions designed to differentiate top-performing students were somewhat more difficult. As the sun set on this year's Suneung Day, the students of 2025 have truly earned their rest after a series of subjects, starting off with Korean language, continuing through with math, English, and elective subjects. For many, the day marked not just the end of an exam, but the beginning of a new chapter, a well-earned rest after years of effort. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
That brings us to the end of Weekly News Highlights. Thank you for watching and enjoy the rest of your weekend.